Life Without Parole. A Life Behind Bars documentary. Some prison sentences are measured in years. Others are measured in decades. And some are measured in something else entirely. Life without parole is not a sentence with an end date. It is a sentence designed to remove the concept of release altogether. This documentary examines what it means to be sentenced to prison, permanently. If you value factual, long-form documentaries about prisons and the justice system, consider subscribing to Life Behind Bars. Your support allows us to continue producing in-depth stories like this one. What life without parole actually means. Life without parole is often misunderstood. It does not mean a long sentence. It does not mean delayed release. It means there is no legal pathway to freedom. Inmates sentenced to life without parole are not eligible for parole hearings. They are not reviewed for release based on behavior or rehabilitation. The sentence is designed to last until death. How this sentence emerged. Life without parole expanded significantly during periods of heightened concern about violent crime. Lawmakers sought sentences that would ensure permanent incapacitation, eliminate uncertainty, remove perceived risk of release. The sentence offered finality. Once imposed, the system no longer had to decide when someone was safe to release. Where life without parole is used. Life without parole exists at both the federal and state levels. Its availability varies by jurisdiction. Some states use it frequently. Others restrict or prohibit it. Some apply it only to specific offenses. In the federal system, life without parole is an authorized sentence for certain crimes. In all cases, it represents the most severe form of incarceration short of capital punishment. The difference between life and life without parole. A life sentence does not always mean life without parole. Many life sentences include the possibility of parole after a minimum number of years. Life without parole removes that possibility entirely. There is no countdown, no eligibility date, no review based on progress. Time continues, but release does not. The role of finality in sentencing. Supporters of life without parole often emphasize certainty. The sentence eliminates future decision-making. It removes discretion from parole boards. It prevents reassessment decades later. For the justice system, finality simplifies risk management. But it also eliminates flexibility. Once imposed, the sentence rarely changes. Daily life under a permanent sentence. For inmates serving life without parole, daily life unfolds without a future milestone. There is no release date to prepare for. No timeline to count down. Time is experienced differently. Days are not steps toward freedom, they are repetitions without destination. Incentives without release. Correctional systems still rely on incentives, even for inmates who will never be released. Work assignments, program access, housing considerations. But these incentives no longer point toward freedom. They point only toward stability. Good behavior maintains conditions, it does not change the outcome. The psychological weight of a permanent sentence. A sentence without parole changes how time is experienced. For inmates serving life without parole, the future does not contain a turning point. There is no date that transforms confinement into preparation. The sentence removes anticipation itself. Psychologists studying long-term incarceration note that when release is impossible, motivation reorganizes. Goals narrow. Time becomes cyclical rather than directional. Survival replaces progression. When hope changes form. Hope does not always disappear under a permanent sentence. It changes shape. Rather than hoping for release, inmates may focus on immediate stability, maintaining health, avoiding conflict, preserving routine. Some redirect hope toward family contact, faith, or intellectual pursuits. Others disengage entirely. The system does not mandate how hope adapts, but the sentence constrains its boundaries. Identity without a future exit. A permanent sentence reshapes identity. Without the possibility of reintegration, inmates are no longer preparing to return to society. They are preparing to remain within the institution indefinitely. This alters self-perception. Identity becomes tied to the facility, the routine, and the role one occupies inside. The outside world recedes from practical relevance. For some, this produces acceptance. For others, resignation. Motivation without release incentives. Correctional systems rely on incentives to manage behavior. Even when parole is not an option, incentives remain essential. Housing status, work assignments, access to programs, and personal safety. But the absence of release changes how incentives function. Good behavior no longer leads to freedom. It leads only to marginal improvements in daily conditions. This limits leverage and requires careful management. How prisons manage permanent sentences. Facilities housing large numbers of life without parole inmates often adapt their management strategies. Long-term stability becomes the priority. Administrators may emphasize predictable routines, clear boundaries, reduced movement disruptions, separation from volatile populations. The goal is not transformation. It is containment over decades. The role of programs and work. Programs still exist for inmates serving permanent sentences. Education, work, and structured activity reduce tension and provide purpose, even without release as an outcome. Participation varies widely. Some inmates engage deeply. Others withdraw, seeing no value in credentials that will never be used outside. The system offers structure. Meaning is not guaranteed. Discipline under a life without parole sentence. Discipline operates differently when release is not a concern. Threats of extended time lose relevance. Deterrence relies more heavily on immediate conditions. As a result, segregation and restriction may be used more readily to enforce compliance. This creates a delicate balance, maintaining order without escalating isolation unnecessarily. Aging inside permanent confinement. Life without parole is not static. Inmates age. Health declines. Mobility decreases. Facilities must adapt to long-term medical and custodial needs for a population that will never leave. This introduces new pressures: healthcare costs, accessibility, and end-of-life care within secure environments. The sentence continues, even as the body changes. Legal challenges to life without parole. Life without parole has been repeatedly challenged in courts, not for its severity alone, but for how it is applied. Most legal challenges focus on proportionality of the sentence, age at the time of offense, mental capacity and development, mandatory sentencing laws. Courts have generally upheld life without parole for adults when imposed through individualized sentencing. However, the sentence has faced increasing scrutiny when applied automatically or without consideration of mitigating factors. Juveniles sentenced to life without parole. One of the most significant legal developments involves juveniles sentenced to life without parole. South Supreme Court rulings have held that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles violate constitutional protections. The reasoning centers on developmental differences between juveniles and adults, including impulse control, judgment, and capacity for change. As a result, many jurisdictions now require individualized sentencing hearings when considering such sentences for juveniles. Some states have eliminated juvenile life without parole entirely. Others continue to allow it under limited conditions. Retroactive reviews and resentencing. Court decisions affecting juvenile sentencing have led to resentencing hearings in some cases. These reviews consider factors such as age at the time of offense, behavior during incarceration, evidence of rehabilitation, risk assessment. Outcomes vary widely. Some inmates receive reduced sentences or parole eligibility. Others remain under life without parole terms. The process is complex, resource-intensive, and uneven across jurisdictions. International comparisons. Life without parole is used more frequently in the United States than in most other countries. Many nations limit maximum sentences to fixed terms or provide mandatory review after a set number of years. International human rights organizations have criticized permanent sentences that offer no possibility of release. Supporters of life without parole argue that differences in legal systems, crime rates, and sentencing structures make direct comparisons misleading. The contrast, however, remains significant. Why the sentence persists. Life without parole persists because it offers certainty. It removes future discretion. It prevents reassessment decades later. It eliminates political risk associated with release decisions. For lawmakers and administrators, the sentence simplifies accountability. Once imposed, responsibility shifts away from future decision makers. The costs of permanent incarceration. Permanent incarceration carries long-term costs. As inmates age, healthcare needs increase. Security must be maintained even as physical risk declines. Facilities adapt to mobility limitations and chronic illness. These costs accumulate over decades. They are borne by correctional systems, taxpayers, and institutions designed for long-term containment rather than aging populations. Life without parole and prison culture. The presence of inmates serving life without parole shapes prison culture. Some become stabilizing figures, accustomed to routine and order. Others disengage entirely, seeing little reason to invest in institutional life. Staff must manage a population with no external incentive to comply beyond immediate conditions. This requires consistency, structure, and careful risk management. The ethical question. At its core, life without parole raises a fundamental question. Is incarceration meant only to incapacitate, or does it retain an obligation to allow for change? The sentence resolves risk by eliminating possibility. It ensures safety through permanence. But it also removes the system's ability to reassess who someone has become. Aging and dying under a permanent sentence. Life without parole extends across an entire lifespan. Inmates sentenced in their 20s or 30s often spend decades inside the same system, growing old within its routines. As years pass, priorities change. Violence declines. Health concerns increase. Mobility becomes limited. Correctional facilities increasingly function as long-term care environments for individuals who will never be released. End-of-life care occurs inside secure walls, often far from family and community. The sentence continues, even as physical capacity fades. The system's responsibility over time. Permanent sentences impose long-term obligations on institutions. Healthcare must be provided indefinitely. Security must be maintained regardless of physical threat. Facilities must adapt to aging populations. These responsibilities persist even when risk decreases. Life without parole does not shorten with time. It only becomes more resource-intensive. When punishment outlives purpose. As inmates age, the original rationale for permanent incapacitation is often revisited, informally if not legally. Many no longer resemble the individuals they once were. Yet the sentence does not account for change. Life without parole is designed to be immune to transformation. It treats the past as permanent, the absence of review. Unlike parole-eligible sentences, life without parole removes structured reassessment. There are no mandatory reviews based on age, health, or demonstrated change. Executive clemency remains a possibility in theory. In practice, it is rare. For most inmates serving life without parole, the sentence is final in every practical sense. What life without parole represents. Life without parole represents the furthest extension of punitive certainty. It resolves uncertainty by eliminating discretion. It prevents risk by removing future choice. It ensures safety through permanence. But it also removes the system's ability to acknowledge change, even when change occurs. The question that remains. The debate surrounding life without parole is not only about crime or punishment. It is about what a justice system believes is possible. Is incarceration meant to manage risk indefinitely, or to allow for reassessment over time? Life without parole answers that question decisively. It chooses certainty over reconsideration. As sentences became permanent, another shift followed. The system did not just decide who would never be released, it began deciding who should never have been sent to prison at all. In the next episode, we examine how incarceration expanded beyond its original purpose, and what happens when prisons are used to manage problems they were never designed to solve. Life without parole represents the justice system's most final decision. It removes uncertainty by removing the possibility of release, and with it, the opportunity for reassessment. For those sentenced under it, time continues without destination, and punishment extends beyond years into an entire lifetime. In the next episode, we examine how incarceration expanded beyond punishment, and how prisons came to manage problems they were never designed to solve. Thank you for watching Life Behind Bars.